And with that, we'll start with just a brief moment to call ourselves into community. And I have some house guests today, so I don't have my normal chalice stuff around me. So we'll light this is what we do with the kids. We don't want to use flames.
Aw.
We'll light our hand chalice today in gratitude that we are in community together and for all the wisdom and knowledge and love that we bring together into this community. And with that, I will turn it over to Bob.
All right. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully. Yes. There we are. Okay. What I'm going to do today is read selections from the opening and closing chapters of my book, then play one song, and after that, engage with your questions. But before beginning, I just want to thank Tony and First Unitarian Universalist Church of San Diego for inviting me to share my work with you, and I'm happy that all of you are here. I first encountered the music of Joy Division during my first year, 1979 to 1980, as an undergraduate. At the time, I identified strongly with punk, from the likes of the Sex Pistols and The Clash. Listening to Joy Division, I heard the same freshness, urgency, and intensity that attracted me to punk, yet also something transcending the immediacy and directness of punk, conveying, in contrast, a richly resonant sense of both distance and precision, a controlled fury emanating from a fiercely passionate, yet also agonizingly vulnerable exploration of emotional, psychological, physical, and metaphysical extremes. I knew if Joy Division would tour in the United States, I would do whatever I possibly could to see them live. I learned they did plan to come to the US shortly before I was shocked and saddened to learn of the death of Ian Curtis, lyricist, vocalist, and frontman for Joy Division, by suicide on May 18, 1980, at the age of 23. Ever since, this music has always been my ultimate favorite, and I continually derive new and renewed meaning, as well as experience new and renewed impact from listening to it, as well as in reflecting on what this listening prompts me to think and feel. Joy Division songs dramatize introspection as struggle. What makes this struggle fraught is it transpires in a mysterious realm where reassuring borderlines break down. Joy Division songs end not with tension resolved, but temporarily suspended. The only definite answer they offer us as listeners is we need to join the struggle and seek what we can find for ourselves. From early on, listeners noted an unusual amount of space and separation within this music, and it is these elements of space and separation Martin Hannett augmented in his production work, adding significant amounts of digital delay and echo, as well as filtering and treating each sound source to narrow and concentrate its timbre, while combining the contributions from Ian Curtis, Bernard Sumner, Peter Hook, and Stephen Morris with studio effects designed to accentuate a trance-like movement into a liminal, preternatural space, a surreal yet proximate realm. Notoriously, Curtis derived the name Joy Division for his band from the name given by the Nazis to concentration camp victims forced to serve as sex slaves for their captors. At times, this association and other oblique references to Nazi Germany at gigs and in promotional materials led observers to imagine a connection between Joy Division, the band, and Nazi-style ideology. But aside from representing typical punk-style critical appropriation and re-signification of what a dominant culture finds most frightening and disturbing, and which it has worked the hardest to marginalize even to repress. In choosing the name Joy Division, Curtis identified himself and his band with the victims, and with the humiliation and pain these victims suffered, as well as with their desire to escape and their fear escape is impossible. One of Ian Curtis's favorite books was John Heartfield's photomontages of the Nazi period. Heartfield's photomontages relentlessly expose and condemn the monstrosity of Nazism. Curtis's and Joy Division's anti-fascism follows in Heartfield's path. The back jacket of my copy cites German novelist Oskar Maria Graf, who comments concerning Heartfield's photomontages: he has disturbed the sleep of the world more than anyone else in our time. The music of Ian Curtis and Joy Division likewise conjures a disturbed sleep, a restless refusal to accept the way things are, or the way things seem, is the natural, desirable, or necessary way they must be. Curtis's art can readily be conceived as an exploration of an inquiry into the following two sets of fundamental questions. 1. Why do I exist? What is the meaning, value, and purpose of my existence? To what extent can I exercise any influence and any control over what this meaning, value, and purpose becomes? How can and how should I attempt to do so? 2. In what ways and to what extent am I responsible for others, for the suffering, hardship, and pain others experience, for the violence and cruelty, as well as the injustice and unfairness in the world? What can and what should I do about any of this? Curtis's art can be readily conceived of as well as an exploration of an inquiry into the sense and meaning of alienation, isolation, and loneliness, the position and experience of being a stranger, an outsider, and an outcast, vulnerability, entrapment, anxiety, and fear, and the need to connect, especially intimately, along with the simultaneous difficulty of doing so. Curtis's art also makes sense as the staging of a dramatic encounter with the shocking resilience and metamorphic resurgence of fascist tendencies after the end of World War II and the Holocaust at the heart of ostensibly democratic, advanced capitalist Western society. The same questions and the same issues are likewise central to major directions in modern to contemporary critical theory, as represented in my book by critical theories from Karl Marx, Emil Durkheim, Sigmund Freud, Max Weber, Louis Althusser, Michel Foucault, Aimé Césaire, Edward Said, Tran Menha, Robert McGruer, Anne Sedovich, and Avery F. Gordon. Questions and issues concerning the meaning, value, and purpose of existence, our responsibility to and for others, human beings as complex, multiple, contradictory, and dynamic, the challenge of intimacy and the power of love, the quest for authenticity and the struggle for integrity, what it means to be included and excluded, along with how, as well as why, this occurs, how social change happens, along with what can be the contribution of artistic and cultural work toward this transformation, and the ethical responsibility to continue to confront and find a way to work through myriad metaphorical darknesses in our individual and social lives, despite how tremendously challenging, difficult, and painful this can so often be. Ian Curtis's life and his work transcend the circumstances of his death. Even when moving toward exhaustion, the lyrics and the music propose the need to continue, to endure, and to persist, and to do so even when this seems impossible. Curtis's art is not simply a prolonged suicide note. Curtis was not destined to die young. His suicide was not inevitable. He had family, he had friends, and he had community. He had support. Yet he needed more, even much more. In his personal life, he faced multiple pressures, all of which taken together would have been enough to overwhelm. At the same time, he was a fiercely committed artist, a cultural resistance fighter who maintained high standards and ambitions for what he sought to come to grips with through his art. And art required him to face up to and to symbolically relive the worst horrors human beings are capable of perpetrating against each other. That is a noble cause, but it needs to be a genuinely collective one. Curtis ended up a victim of the very society he was protesting against, a society that forces us, all too often, to resist its injustices in whatever ways we can, but at the same time to do so individually, isolated and alone, even when ostensibly surrounded by many other people. A society all too often complacent about, distracted from, numbed by, or otherwise indifferent to human suffering, including the suffering of those yet further suffering on account of their empathetic identification with and solidaristic support for the suffering of others. When I first began to pursue sustained intellectual work focused around Ian Curtis and Joy Division, I recognized many uncanny personal connections. For instance, I have struggled for a long time with multiple serious chronic physical illnesses that amount to real, if largely non-visible, disabilities, and this includes, like Ian Curtis, epilepsy. I have also struggled, off and on, like Curtis, with serious mental illness as well, especially anxiety, but also depression, and even post-traumatic stress disorder. I empathetically identify most, however, with what I perceive throughout the music of Joy Division, a determination to survive, endure, and persist, even when this seems impossible, even when this seems absurd, and a determination, what's more, to keep struggling, even when feeling worn down and out. Determination and persistence strike me as my own two most characteristic traits. It is this commonality of determination, persistence, and readiness to keep on struggling that explains my lifelong passion for the music as art of Ian Curtis and Joy Division. Excessive flashpoints, beyond all reach, suggests something happening in the distance, perceptible yet impossible to control. These lines suggest dangerous forces threatening violent disruptions. The latter might well refer to numerous possible forms of social antagonism that the narrator protagonist in 24 Hours would like to do something about, but which he can't, as he feels not only powerless to do so, but also trapped, confined, and prevented from even trying to do so. Excessive suggests, moreover, these flashpoints breaking out all over, indicative of a state of extreme crisis. In common usage, flashpoint signifies arriving at a critical point or stage involving the igniting of conflict, especially violent conflict, which otherwise marks a decisive action or change, especially a dramatic rupture or shift. Excessive flashpoints thereby suggest too many of these happening all at once or in too rapid succession, too many to cope with, even too many to comprehend. Excessive flashpoints suggest what appears and feels overwhelming, all the more so when these flashpoints are not only excessive, but also beyond all reach. Yet in listening to Joy Division, and not just to the song 24 Hours, from which these lyrics come, I hear a commitment, paradoxically, to strive to reach what appears and feels beyond all reach. This means confronting the risk and the danger by moving toward and not retreating from it. Engage in order to feel in order to comprehend. Do so, no matter how terrifying the prospect. In 1970s Britain, many Britons felt increasingly insecure, facing a proliferation of simultaneous crises that their social and political leaders seemed unable to redress, let alone prevent, while many felt disillusioned by the apparent inadequacies and indeed failings of post-World War II social democratic institutions and arrangements. These influences show up, indirectly, in the lyrics of Ian Curtis and the music of Joy Division. For many Britons living in the 1970s felt like living in a time of excessive flashpoints. The 1970s marked the beginnings of neoliberal capitalism. In the 1970s, people vaguely perceived and vaguely felt the initial impacts of neoliberal emergence, and it makes sense to interpret Joy Division as channeling these vague perceptions and feelings. Distinctive, however, with the music of Joy Division is an insinuation that the immediate present and the foreseeable future are virtually apocalyptic times, at least for some, if not for many, or at least feel as such, and in turn require a matching response. The music of Joy Division insinuates what such a matching response might be, and whether it might be possible remains uncertain, even doubtful, yet the attempt to find it must be pursued. Solitary demands for all I'd like to keep draws a striking contrast with excessive flashpoints beyond all reach. Solitary demands for all I'd like to keep references a narrow locus immediately surrounding the narrator protagonist, as opposed to distant conflagrations the narrator protagonist is aware of but can do nothing about. This line describes these are demands for all the narrator protagonist would like to keep, with that modifier all suggesting a situation in which someone or something is demanding he give up everything, including everything that matters and has mattered to him, refusing to allow him to keep virtually anything. Solitary demands can suggest what it is like to experience loneliness, and loneliness resonates as strongly with the lyrics of Ian Curtis and the music of Joy Division as does insecurity. Yet insofar as it makes sense to interpret the music of Joy Division as concerned with loneliness, it hardly seems adequate to posit these songs as merely expressing direct feelings of loneliness on the part of the narrator protagonist of the lyrics, let alone the music as persona, let alone Ian Curtis himself. The songs enact not only a performative engagement with what loneliness immediately feels like, but also with distance from the immediacy of feeling lonely, that allows for critical reflection upon loneliness, including reflection upon not only our own loneliness, but also the loneliness of others. Despite the space between the instruments and other sound sources in Joy Division songs, these songs involve tight collaborations among multiple contributors in a collective effort that involves considerable interaction and cooperation, in itself suggesting the antithesis of loneliness. The same holds true in relation to Joy Division creating this music to be shared with other people in live performance, on record, and beyond. Such sharing can forge and sustain community to counter loneliness, and many have testified that listening to and identifying with the music of Joy Division has done so for them, enabling these listeners to feel part of a community of Joy Division fans, even an imagined community of lonely people feeling less lonely by means of this shared connection with other lonely people. If it makes sense to interpret Joy Division's music as about loneliness, it also makes sense, therefore, to interpret this music as about confronting, countering, and even striving to overcome loneliness. Joy Division's music evokes, invokes, and ritualistically performs what it feels like to be lonely, but it does more than that. In other words, it contemplates what such feeling might mean from a distance, from a critical distance. The lyrics of Ian Curtis and the music of Joy Division resonate with the loneliness that follows from working jobs performing alienated labor, and for the spirit-destroying consequences of doing so for decades on end, with the loneliness that follows from the pressures of normative expectation, including that people should not maintain multiple, simultaneous, intimate relationships, and with the loneliness that follows from experience of violence and trauma. At the same time, these lyrics and this music manifest commitment to strive to find a way out and to encourage others, those of us listening closely and attending carefully to these lyrics and this music, to join this effort. In accepting this encouragement, we nourish a flicker of hope that it might be possible, even when it feels impossible, to counter, contest, and break past the worst ravages of loneliness. I interpret the lines, I never realized the lengths I'd have to go, followed by all the darkest corners of a sense I didn't know, as indicative of the narrator protagonist announcing he has taken on an enormously daunting challenge in a highly idealist and romantic fashion to confront the worst evils human beings are capable of committing versus each other. This confrontation has forced the narrator protagonist to feel for himself what it is like to experience these evils as victim and as perpetrator, as well as bystander and as witness. The narrator protagonist is devastated by what he has encountered, and in particular by what has been required of him, not to retreat from the encounter, or otherwise protect himself from feeling the impact of what he encounters. The narrator protagonist has discovered an appalling depth and extent of responsibility for and complicity in evil, including an appalling depth and extent of his own responsibility for and complicity with evil. The lengths he has traveled through the darkest corners of what he did not previously register at all has left him in desperate need of help to recover, but bewildered concerning where to turn to find such help, if it exists at all. Darkest corners suggest the most frightening places, the places we fear the most, and the places where we fear we will meet the worst possible outcomes. According to the lyrics from 24 Hours, we cannot understand, let alone appreciate, the darkness within these corners for how dark it truly is until we enter these spaces. It is imperative we do so, yet doing so will leave us devastated. Such a task requires a collective effort because individuals attempting this by themselves alone risk being unable to survive the impact. Joy Division songs alternate moments of calm with moments of unrest and moments of hope with moments of fear, while both the lyrics and the music call attention to the distance between the position from which they are addressing us and where we are situated versus the position of the imagined characters in the imagined situations, in the imagined dramas these lyrics and this music simultaneously stage and perform for us. Yet neither these lyrics nor this music propose that if we carefully attend to intersections among past, present, and prospective future fears, will we recognize that we can cope with and make positive use of what we fear. Fear in the lyrics of Ian Curtis and the music of Joy Division is not invoked in order to dampen this down, to lower the temperature, to subject it to rational management and control. To the contrary, according to these lyrics and this music, fear must be taken on, while emphasizing that doing so feels terrifying. According to these lyrics and this music, where fear takes us, how, through what, and with what consequences, if we make it through, cannot be managed or controlled, let alone predicted or guaranteed. Fascism provides a pressure valve for release of tension for capitalism in crisis, tension that threatens to reach the point of explosion, that threatens the foundations of capitalism. The lyrics of Ian Curtis and the music of Joy Division resonate with frustration over desires and needs unmet, over spiritual emptiness, over lack and loss of genuine meaning, purpose, and fulfillment, as well as with fear that all of this cause for frustration can and will lead to ramping up of conflict and especially of violence. Yet the lyrics of Ian Curtis and the music of Joy Division do not identify with, let alone valorize, exercise of crushing strength versus those easily targeted as not only different and other, but also as weak and vulnerable. To the contrary, the lyrics of Ian Curtis and the music of Joy Division engage issues of insecurity, loneliness, and fear, including in relation to fascism, from the vantage point of the marginalized, the excluded, and the brutalized. In other words, marginalized, excluded, and brutalized on account of being, or perceived as being, different, other, weak, and vulnerable. Yes, in identifying with the narrator protagonist in the lyrics of Ian Curtis and the music as persona of Joy Division, one identifies with the vantage point of one who fears he bears responsibility for and maintains complicity with fascism's influence and appeal. Yet he fears this responsibility and this complicity because he fears this influence and appeal to be insidious, and because he fears reemergent fascism to be horrific. Most listeners and commentators associate the lyrics of Ian Curtis and the music of Joy Division with hopelessness as opposed to hope, and with dystopia as opposed to utopia. I nonetheless propose these lyrics and this music also make useful sense as manifestations of striving and struggling for hope and toward utopia. In order to conceive of something as dystopian, it is necessary to conceive of the same as not what is wanted or needed, not what is hoped for and sought after, not what is right and good. Even if the dystopian feels inexorable, the dystopian, if it is identifiable as dystopian, feels wrong and feels bad. This is why theorists of fictional dystopias interpret these as warnings and as exhortations to do everything possible to prevent existing tendencies toward the worst imaginable state of affairs from reaching that point. Even when people assert they are living in dystopia, that dystopia is no longer mere fiction, they conceive what they are living in as wrong and as bad. The dystopian is intrinsically interlinked with recognition of an urgent need for radical transformation, an urgent need for utopian striving, and an urgent need to find, and especially to found, reasons for hope. The lyrics of Ian Curtis and the music of Joy Division, even at their bleakest, challenge us to respond to our own experiences of living in dystopia by aligning with utopian striving and reasons for hope. As his English translators indicate, Ernst Bloch's 3-volume, 1,500 pages long The Principle of Hope is, quote, a historical and collective statement of hope, unquote, against annihilation, as well as, quote, a practical guide to living in late capitalist society in cultural decline, where the possibility of a truly human society seems remote and the dominant emotion is fear, unquote. As Bloch avers, quote, even in a desperate man, unquote, consciousness, quote, does not stare into complete nothingness, unquote, and has not lost connection with utopian yearning. Quote, even the suicide still flees into negation as into a womb. He expects rest. Even disappointed hope wanders around agonizing, a ghost that has lost its way back to the cemetery and clings to refuted images, unquote. In other words, such a ghost manifests a persistent longing for what is at present refuted or at present apparently refuted, but nonetheless desperately desired and indeed desperately needed. The utopian desire and need to overcome an alienated life, a life dominated by insecurity, loneliness, and fear, persists even at the edge, even upon the verge of self-annihilation. After all, as Bloch insists, quote, there is no hope without anxiety, and no anxiety without hope, unquote. Strikingly, this image of the desperate man on the edge or verge of the suicidal, overcome with disappointed hope, yet continuing to wander about and agonize restlessly, coincides remarkably closely with interpretations I offer of the narrator protagonists of the lyrics and the music as personae in the songs of Ian Curtis and Joy Division, as does the image of this same desperate man who, even as he flees toward negation and expects or wants rest, nonetheless persists in ghostly form in still manifesting an unsatisfied desire for what has seemingly been refuted, denied, and defeated. Even when repeatedly running up against hopelessness, the lyrics of Ian Curtis and the music of Joy Division continue to evince a hunger rooted in deprivation and redolent of discontent that wants and needs reason and ground for hope. If one takes into account the music as well as the lyrics, it makes sense to interpret these songs as more committed to and aligned with struggle than surrender, and with persistence than with cessation. Yes, the songs make sense as embodying a fleeting and fragile quest for hope, but hope remains, even at the most excruciating extremes. Because after all, to push this far, despite how devastating it feels, requires the outlandish hope that it might yet be possible to reach the light, and that even at its darkest, glimmers of the light beyond are perceptible. Bloch is compelled by the will to journey he finds to be commonplace in artistic daydreaming, identifying this as a vital form of forward venturing. For Bloch, quote, art is a laboratory and also a feast of implemented possibilities, unquote. That is, possibilities implemented in artistic form, which in turn correspond to pre-appearance of what can or might eventually be realizable otherwise. Yet Bloch also salutes great art as that which is not closed and does not feign completeness, but rather emphasizes its openness and that it is a fragment in a process that is larger and not yet resolved. This kind of art allows ample room for surprise, astonishment, and wonder, all of which are necessary in order to imagine and believe that the way things are is not the way they have to be. Again and again, Joy Division songs involve a journey, and even more than this, a will to a journey, a compulsion to venture beyond and to venture forward, even when experiencing immense trepidation about doing so, even when experiencing grave doubt about the possibility of surviving doing so. Likewise, Joy Division songs conclude not with resolution of tension, of conflict, and of the need to struggle, but rather with only temporary, tentative, and tenuous dissolution or suspension of the same. The songs, in addition, are multiply ambiguous in terms of reasonable interpretations of possible meanings, while music and lyrics often do not neatly line up in terms of precisely what meanings they respectively suggest, nor do particular instrumental contributions or studio production techniques do so, nor do distinct dimensions of musical sound, such as loudness, rhythm, pitch, timbre, and delivery, do so. And even as these songs come across as tightly conceived and executed, as coherently organized and articulated, they suggest collaboration among contributors aware of and attuned to each other, who at the same time maintain considerable autonomy, such that each contributor follows his own course in his own space. These songs make sense as dramatizing a venturing beyond and a pressing to the limits, to the furthest and most dangerously self-destructive extremes, in desiring to get past and beyond, to escape and transcend the problems and limitations of the present, of the existing status quo, of the normative, of the commonsensical, of the ordinary, of the settled, of the established, of the routinized, fetishized, reified, and alienated constraints of what life, according to existing economic laws, social structures, political imperatives, and cultural mores, define and delimit as the best that can ever be. Joy Division songs make sense as true to unrest, and despite Curtis's notoriously frenzied dancing, as the obverse of sheer chaotic restlessness. Instead, they show unrest as regular, repeated, and as regularly and repeatedly ebbing and flowing to movements that attest to encountering routine and persistent constraints, while striving to imagine possibilities beyond these constraints, as well as to push toward experiencing those same possibilities, possibilities that, paradoxically enough, often seem impossible, at least impossible to articulate or otherwise represent in conventional terms through conventional means, yet which keep calling the music as persona and us in identification with the music as persona to come toward them, to venture forward in restless pursuit. According to Bloch, music, more than any other art, quote, works explosively, occurring in open space, unquote, and likewise more readily than any other art transports us to, quote, the level of the beautiful and the sublime, unquote. In music, quote, sound hovers. It is not clear where it is located. Equally, it is not very plain what it expresses. Completely different words have been set to the same tune. Yet a sound can express better than any color or words that transition where we no longer know whether it is a lament or a consolation, unquote. Music is best of all the arts in engaging, quote, the unfathomable, unquote, that otherwise tantalizes beyond the capabilities of verbal and visual modes of representation. Indeed, quote, music is the supreme art of utopian venturing beyond, unquote, and, quote, there is something overhauling and unconcluded in music which no poetry can satisfy unless it be the poetry which possibly develops music from itself, unquote. All of what Bloch here identifies as among music's distinctive capabilities feature in my descriptions, analyses, and interpretations of Joy Division's music. The frequently remarked extent of felt space, and especially of felt distance, among the constituent sound lines in Joy Division songs. The characteristic unfolding of the structure of these songs across stages, highlighting movement upward and downward across small pitch intervals organized in terms of repeated short sequences that encompass only slight variations, pushing slowly but inexorably through confrontation, climax, denouement, and dissolution, regular alternations in total density of sound, arresting openings that build suspense in leading up to the initial entrance of the vocal, as well as subsequently in the song, to returns and reassertions of the principal melodic line and of the choral refrain. Taken together, all of these dimensions make it possible for Joy Division songs to work explosively and to do so in open space. Joy Division songs frequently suggest a hovering presence, even as the location of constituent lines and patterns of sound responsible for this suggestion can be readily charted within the sound box. These sounds are nonetheless arranged across the space of the sound box to enhance the felt perception of their distinction within a composite interarticulation. Deployment within the sound box emphasizes perceived space between sounds, and in turn accentuates the impact of those sounds pushed to the front and center, notably Ian Curtis's vocal, rendering the hovering presence of these sounds feel greater and nearer, if only for the fleeting duration of their sounding within the song. These songs straddle the border between lament and consolation, especially when we take into account the interplay among all the lines and patterns of sound comprising the song. Joy Division songs illustrate the effective impact music exercises via exploration of taboos and through the invisibility, intangibility, and ephemerality of constituent sounds, which closely aligns with conjuring the unfathomable. These songs make sense as dramatizing striving at or toward venturing beyond, and they make sense as performing an overhauling of what is commonly left unquestioned or perceived as too traumatic to take up and to take on, even as this overhauling ceases without arrival at any definite resolution. Bloch theorizes that, quote, music begins longingly and already definitely as a call to that which is missing, unquote. Quote, something is lacking. The sound at least clearly expresses this lack, unquote. Quote, precisely the sharp figures of restlessness are unmistakably tuned in music, unquote. Bloch attributes to music, quote, more than other arts the quality of incorporating the numerous sufferings, the wishes, and the spots of light of the oppressed class, unquote. Bloch is adamant that, quote, social tendencies themselves have been reflected and have been uttered in sound material that take the form of music. Expression is central to music, yet the expression of music is still fermenting, has not yet come out in complete, definable form, unquote. Quote, the relation to this world makes music, particularly in social terms, seismographic. It reflects cracks under the social surface, expresses wishes for change, bids us to hope, unquote. Not only seismographic as, quote, music with its open flow, full of the beginnings of something still indefinable, necessarily posits something extraterritorial at the same time, unquote. Music is redolent not only of fissures within the existing social status quo, but also of anticipations of forms of organization that might yet be possible beyond the existing social status quo. Bloch touts, quote, the figures of venturing beyond the limits and tone spheres. They are articulations in a developing language of intensity, unquote. This quest involves immense struggle. Music dares to venture as far as it is possible to venture. Quote, music really does go to face death, unquote. Indeed, quote, how much deep music has its darkness, indeed its light, from this ingredient, the night of death, and from its black there burns a brightness different from that which otherwise already exists, unquote. Quote, all music of annihilation points towards a robust core, which, because it has not yet blossomed, cannot pass away either. In the darkness of this music gleam the treasures that will not be corrupted, unquote. The lyrics of Ian Curtis and the music of Joy Division resonate with struggle against alienation and with reaching toward a far horizon where it might yet be possible to realize the dream of life lived beyond alienation. This is so, even as these lyrics and this music simultaneously convey enormous doubt that such realization might ever be practically possible, at least for us, and even as these lyrics and this music simultaneously register this far horizon as so dimly, barely perceptible, it remains easier to believe its existence is an illusion, even a delusion. And yet, the lyrics of Ian Curtis and the music of Joy Division also resonate with striving, even when striving seems pointless, doomed to fail, and altogether absurd, to make contact with what exceeds the capability of existing frames of intelligibility to signify. In other words, to attempt not only to represent the unrepresentable, but also to make contact with dimensions of the real that cannot be represented, at least not according to what existing words and images are able to represent. What's more, the lyrics of Ian Curtis and the music of Joy Division resonate with a willingness to pursue this quest, full of fear and trepidation, all the way through, even if this demands facing death or otherwise risking annihilation. These lyrics and this music make sense as reflective of and responsive to not only anguish and trauma, but also protest against anguish and trauma, as well as longing and striving to venture beyond, to overcome pain and trauma, as this pain and trauma is experienced, in particular, by people who are and have been oppressed, exploited, outcast, and abused. In my own life, despite often being plagued by anxiety and doubt, And despite often being extremely self-critical, I maintained a persistently stubborn hope. Again and again, I have pulled myself back from the brink to refocus on what I can do, slowly, small step by finding ways to act, not just continue to stress out. I reminded myself that even when everything feels awful and I experience no reason to expect any change, that change can and will happen, often suddenly, and often where and as I don't expect it. I frequently persisted when I felt I was not at all capable of doing so. What I think about and feel when I listen to Joy Division is ultimately for me always much the same, despite the bleakness of the lyrics and despite Ian Curtis's suicide. I empathize with the extent and intensity of insecurity, loneliness, fear, and alienation a great many people feel a quarter of the way through the 21st century. Yet I remain long term hopeful because I believe we want and we deserve so much better. I believe as long as capitalist society persists, that even those living in the relatively most fortunate positions will not be leading their best possible lives and will not be truly free. I believe we remain collectively capable of forging a democratic socialist alternative. I believe we can come collectively to embrace the work necessary to get from here to there. I value engaging forthrightly with the violence, meanness, cruelty, callousness, and hatred on the one hand, as well as the pain, trauma, suffering, grief, desperation, and despair on the other hand, that is part and parcel of living in capitalist society, and especially living in capitalist society where fascism remains an insidious force that can all too easily break through. It is, paradoxically enough, such engagement that sparks hope in me, because I don't accept fascism is the fate of humanity, is our inescapable destiny, even if and when I don't know how we get past it. But I believe we can. It is worth a try, and it is important for me to contribute as best I can, all the while accepting nothing in this quest is guaranteed, and that includes survival along the way. All right, and now I will play 24 Hours for you.
Flashpoints beyond all reach, solitary demands for all I'd like to keep. Let's take gone is all, a sense I didn't know. Just for one moment, I heard somebody call. Look beyond the day in hand, there's nothing there at all. Now that I've realized how it's all gone wrong, gotta find some therapy. This treatment takes too long. Deep in the heart of where sympathy has sway, gotta find my destiny before it gets too late.
All right. So I'm ready now to engage with any questions that anybody might have. That was a short selection of excerpts from a much longer book that I managed to piece together, and I hope what was coherent. Um, but I'm happy to take questions. And I'm happy to just talk further about the book if need be. But uh,
I have a question.
sure.
So it took you some time to write this book, and it feels just like chillingly, just relevant to our current
Mhm.
political situation. What was the political scene like when you started this book versus when you finished? And I mean, the message has been the same since,
All right.
70s, 80s, but what
Yeah.
was that like?
All right. So I think I'll answer this question in an indirect way, but I think it might be an interesting way because uh, I was an undergraduate at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, from 1979 to 1983. And I remember as a sophomore, I took a class called State and Society, and Wesleyan was a very, especially then, but I think it continues now, a very far left campus in terms of the overall political orientation of the student body. The professor assigned us this question, what are the prospects for a successful socialist revolution in the United States of America within the next 5 years? Uh, and myself, I thought, absolutely impossible. But the vast majority of other students seemed to either decide that this was the prospect was good, was the way that they should write, or it's what they actually believed. And when I wrote that it was far more likely that we would have fascism than socialism in the near future, uh, the professor actually ended up reading selections of my paper to the rest of the class, embarrassing me. But I persisted with that feeling for a long, long time. I've recognized, I think, many signs in everyday life of what I've characterized in this book and otherwise as the fascism of everyday life. Uh, uh, and at the time that I first started writing this book, there were a lot of signs in many places that uh, what we are witnessing very much in the foreground now didn't come out of nowhere. And that especially throughout my life, I've been struck by how cruel and callous, indifferent and numb our society can easily make so many of us. And I would say our society makes us that rather than suggest that that's intrinsically how any of us are. And so that was something that I was drawing upon. I also had this recurrent dream ever since I was a young person of, and it just kept happening, of there was going to be a fascist takeover was happening, and I had to escape together with whoever was my friends in the dream. And it was the same dream over and over again. So I did propose as an undergraduate, as a faculty member. Uh, at University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire at some point in time with a specially advanced student that we work on a screenplay for a fictional feature film that depicted this dream. And we did. We got all the way through, but we didn't develop it into an actual film. Nonetheless, I've had these fears and concerns for a long time, and in that may well also be a significant part of why Joy Division's music has resonated with me for as long as it has. But just to add a little bit more to this before I'll wrap up this particular response, I was teaching a number of classes on popular music as cultural studies at University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. And I was thinking, oh, these are all going well, fine, but I'd like to do something different. I'd like to not just move from one kind of music quickly to another kind of music to another kind of music. I'd like to take just one musical group and one musician and stage a series of encounters and dialogues between that music and work in critical theory. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, it has to be with my favorite music. And so I did. I was worried that students would not find uh, courses focusing on those kind of encounters and dialogues between the music of Ian Curtis and Joy Division, which was somewhat dated by then, for sure. Uh, and critical theory to be interesting, but they did. And the students were great in all five of these classes, very enthusiastically engaged, did terrific work. And it was those students themselves who strongly encouraged me to write a book. I think I resisted for quite a long time, thinking, no, 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 I could not possibly write a book. And they pushed me, and I did. So, yeah, hopefully that was something of an answer about where this all came from. Uh,
Yes, thank you.
yeah, there's more, but in some ways, I say this book is a career culminating work, and I hope it's not a life culminating work, but it's it's certainly a career culminating work, representative of 38 years focusing on teaching critical theory and critical studies at the university level, 27 years at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. And it's a part memoir. You may have gathered that from what I shared in the reading, but it's even more of that. And this has a lot to do with initial reading of something very early in the process I read before at a public presentation at UW-Eau Claire, and then colleagues suggested very strongly that you should make this at least a part personal memoir. I didn't know where that idea was coming from at first. I was a little bit surprised and taken aback. And you can imagine I felt a little bit disturbed when colleagues who didn't know anything about Ian Curtis before hearing my presentation said, when you talk about Ian Curtis, it reminds me so much of yourself. And I thought, I don't feel like that entirely as complimentary. But nonetheless, I decided to go with that. And so, among other things, the book is a part personal memoir. Okay. Any other questions that people might want to ask? And I could always do what I've done in teaching, which is these are questions that other people have asked, or I think you might be asking, but you're not sure about asking. But anyway, if you have questions, I'm happy, or comments.
Yeah, I like that you made it part memoir because it makes, I think a lot of people can find it relatable, but kind of not want to admit it to themselves that they find it super relatable.
Yeah.
But, you saying it's like, okay, maybe I'm not so odd, you know, relating to this figure, this character.
Yeah. And I think it's the struggle, determination and persistence that I identify with most, as I indicated. And I think, if I want to go that far, and a lot of times I don't, but I think that Ian Curtis was 23, and when you're 23, you're quite young, and sometimes you just haven't yet uh, had the opportunity to work through a lot of things in ways that sometimes you do as you're older. Bernard Sumner in also in Joy Division with Ian Curtis that suggested if Curtis could have made it to his 30s, uh, it probably could have worked it out where if he had to, he could have done something else and been productive in that. But in his own life, he was going through trouble because his marriage was not working, but he was deeply in love with his wife, and yet he had found a soulmate, and he wanted to preserve both relationships and didn't see how it would be unacceptable to have both at the same time, but others around him found that to be kind of hard to believe, hard to accept. He also had severe epilepsy, which was making it increasingly difficult for him to continue in what had been his ambition. And at that point in time, people who were treated for epilepsy were forced to wear helmets and often were restricted, highly restricted. He actually worked as a disability resource officer, where he worked with disabled people in helping them find jobs. So he was very familiar with that, and he was very concerned about what his destiny would be afterward. He was afraid he wouldn't be able to do very much, and that he didn't know where he could go with his life. So that was certainly part of what was going on for him at the same time. And he was a person who was both driven to perform, loved that, but also shy too, and hated performing. So it was kind of a combination of both. The band were about to go to New York, and he both wanted to go, didn't want to go. So there were lots of tensions in his life that. But at the same time, it was the late 70s, 1980. And as many commented in the working class culture at the time among males, you just didn't talk about those kind of things. And so even though there were ample signs in retrospect, many of his friends just kind of passed them off and didn't pursue them that much further because that was the way things were at that point in time. You didn't talk about mental illness, about depression. You didn't admit it. You didn't even know the words if you were experiencing it. Okay, but any other questions or comments? I can ramble on about this, of course, as you can imagine. And I'll just mention something that I was talking about with Andy, who's got his muted, is that yes, it's clear that I do have I could call it obsession with Joy Division. You can see in the background images behind me of three, but also in our house we have framed images from Joy Division, Ian Curtis, and Andy's always been I'll just say kind enough to welcome us, decorate our house with lots of that. Uh, and yes, sharing this enthusiasm with me.
So you referenced that there are other big fans of Joy Division. I can see,
Yeah, yeah,
you are quite a fan.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
is your level of connection something that you say there's others that are on par with it, or would you say you're, you know, a tier
Uh,
past? There's others who are past
I think
you.
that, I think there's a lot, and some of the students I taught in classes said, if anything, it's just hard to approach Joy Division because it seems like there's been such enormous hype surrounding Joy Division, especially long after the band ended its live uh, career following Curtis's suicide. And today, there's just a tremendous amount of interest in the band, a lot of scholarly interest, but a lot of enthusiasm. Lots of places I've gone. The collage that I showed earlier shows me in various different times of my life wearing uh, Joy Division shirts and things like that. I've found people immediately coming up to me just on the basis of what I was wearing to introduce themselves as fans. And I've been to Manchester and spent a considerable amount of time there on multiple occasions where I've met a lot of really devoted fans, but they're all over the world. And in the book itself, I do cite and draw upon work of many people who made um, passionate identifications with this music, with Ian Curtis, based upon connections with what it felt like in their own situations, from New Zealand to all kinds of places, and to Iran, to many other locations. So yeah, there are a lot of passionate fans and have been. I would say nobody has written a book anywhere near as long as I have about this subject matter, or nobody has tried to do the kinds of things that I have done about this subject matter, because others, they have drawn upon critical theory, but they haven't staged encounters and dialogues at the length that I do between specific works in critical theory and this music as art. And one of the other things I do is I teach people reading it how to make sense of and use of critical theory as concrete, relevant, and urgent, as focused on questions and issues that concern us all. That sometimes the esoteric language of critical theory can seem like it doesn't. And I make a lot of connections, as I did in teaching, with what I think many people who are coming to critical theory for the first time uh, need in order to be able to understand and appreciate its relevance and its use in their lives. And I also, because this is something I stressed in teaching this set of classes and other music classes I taught, I also insist that the meaning and impact of this music is not by any means just the lyrics or even the vocalization of lyrics. So in every single case where I think in this, it's 18 songs that I discuss at great length, that I describe, analyze, and interpret. I go through uh, a whole considerable array of dimensions of the music, and uh, describe, analyze, and interpret those and how they relate to other uh, dimensions of the music and to the lyrics, as well as how people have made sense of and responded to this particular song uh, in the past and all the way up to the present, in leading up to how I myself make sense of and respond to the music. And I force myself to do something that I'm encouraging others to do, is to uh, uh, reflect upon what the music makes you think about and feel as you're listening to it, because that can and will change over the course of your lifetime if it's a music that you return to. And I described, analyzed, and interpret what my reaction response was to the music at the time that I was doing it in writing the book. So that was another thing that I was demonstrating, uh, an approach to. I was also trying to suggest that even if you're not a musician, you can do a lot of this, and you can, because people they derive enormous amount of insight and value from, and not just value, but insight from the music that they listen to. And in the classes I taught, I encourage students at the end to choose a musician or musical group that has mattered to them in their life, and do a final presentation to the rest of the class about how and why that has mattered to them, with the example that I've given throughout the class of Ian Curtis and Joy Division. And it could be something totally different. And it was uh, all kinds of different musicians, ones that sometimes people were wondering, where did that come from? But yeah, I appreciate that, because that's what I wanted people to feel, that the music they listen to matters, and the meaning, the impact that they derive from listening to and reflecting upon and drawing upon that music in their life matters. And they can do even much more with it than they realize. And I'm giving them tools to do that, showing them that this is very relevant to lots of big issues that are happening in their lives and all around us. Okay, so any other questions or comments?
I have one that is sort of,
Okay,
so I'm thinking about that. There's a very old, like sort of time-worn UU joke that we UUs are not good singers because we're always scanning ahead to see if we agree with the lyrics.
okay.
And so I wonder, from that sort of perspective, uh, what is one of the lyrics that you just really resonate? Like if you had to pick a top lyric, one that you really resonate with, and is there one that you found like you question?
Well, I this song that I played for you is probably my favorite song, and I've resisted that a lot of times because that's something that I think anybody who's been a teacher here probably can imagine. Sometimes students will just ask, "What's your favorite song?" Or I focused on films, and they say, "What's your all-time favorite film?" And I would often say many different films for many different reasons. But I came up with this one. That was my answer a lot of times. So I do appreciate the lyrics, and I use them as the title of my book. Uh, and I think in terms of lyrics, uh, the ones that don't work for me actually are the ones that came before Joy Division was Joy Division because Joy Division started out as a band that called themselves Warsaw, or actually they were identified by someone else as Stiff Kittens when they hadn't chosen that name, and they immediately replaced it with Warsaw. And the songs they made as Warsaw were I think just very conventional punk songs, and the lyrics much the same. They were rah rah rah, angry at this, angry at that. So those ones they don't do much for me. And when students in my classes sometimes would say they wanted to focus on those songs, I would strongly discourage them because that's your choice, of course, but I don't think they offer as much to do. But the songs that are included on the two albums, Unknown Pleasure and Closer, and the ones that are released as singles and EPs, I found all of them to be quite powerful. And I appreciate that there's a consistent amount of ambiguity, elliptical, and challenging dimensions of these lyrics. But I also appreciate that there's this interesting interplay between the lyrics, the vocalization of the lyrics, and the other instrumental lines and contributions. An interesting thing about the lyrics too is that subsequently, uh, both after Curtis Curtis's death, Bernard Sumner and Peter Hook, Sumner was the guitarist and Hook was the bassist, said that they never paid that close attention to the specificities of these lyrics. They just knew that Ian Curtis was good at lyrics. He always had lyrics, and they sounded really good, and they made us really good, and they fit with the mood that we were establishing. So we thought he's doing his job, we're doing our job. And then it was only afterwards they thought, oh, these lyrics, they really have a lot to them that we weren't really paying that close attention to when we were actually playing the music together with them. Um, so sometimes it's also just how they sound, and I would say there are songs in which I appreciate Curtis's voice and how it sounds better than some other sounds because he and Martin Hannett, the producer, worked a lot on altering his voice in production, and some alterations I like better than others. Sometimes I think it's just so heavily treated that it's gone a little bit too far to my mind. But any other?
When it comes to punk music, larger, in its roots, from what I've heard, is it's quite left, quite radical, and it seems like Joy Division's music has stood the test of time. But do you have any opinion on like other punk artists who've now have some political stances and opinions that probably aren't very punk by the original
Okay,
standards?
yeah. Well, I always try to begin with. I always try to suggest that I interpret Joy Division as post-punk, as opposed to punk. There's definitely a connection, and the post is indicating connection, but also distinction, partly maintaining that connection, partly breaking with. And in the past, I've suggested that one contemporary band that reminds me of Joy Division a great deal is the Twilight Sad. And they themselves have actually covered a number of Joy Division songs and mentioned finding Joy Division to be a direct inspiration in their work, and so much so that they've had deliberately to try to distance themselves from that inspiration so they didn't sound too much like Joy Division. But in terms of punk bands that are left, there are lots of them, and that's one of the things I try to do in the work that I do on my two radio shows, and now the radio station that I've started as well is to highlight music that includes a great deal of music of protest, struggle, and resistance from the left. And there's a lot of it that's being made. Sometimes there are people who are not paying close attention who will say, "Oh, nobody's making protest music anymore," but that's absurd. There's all kinds of music being made, and there's a lot of channels in which it's being shared. There are punk musicians. Every week I discover new musicians. Just this week I played music from a group called Be Nice. And they mean that entirely ironically, because what they are confronting through their music is all these imperatives that they receive in their life that they should be nice. And the song that I played was of the lead singer is fantasizing about killing herself in front of a Microsoft Teams meeting in front of everyone just to kind of break the monotony of Microsoft Teams and what life is like in today's kind of workplaces. And she also, in the same song, sings about how it's between these meetings and how dreadful they are, and then having to commute 2 to 3 hours to the office and spend time there, which is just as dreadful, but in a different way. So, this is definitely punk music today, and it's attacking a whole lot of different kinds of issues. It deals with, for instance, it's very pro transgender and is highly critical of what has been happening versus transgender people in the UK as well as, of course, here in the US. But there's a whole lot of subjects that many of these musicians are taking on, and they're musicians now who are making music directly responsive to the current presidential administration in this country. So musicians are striving to keep up. And I'll just add here a plug for another, I guess it would be set of musicians, because on my show, which actually runs right, right now out of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, WHYS community radio, show called Insurgents. This week I decided that I really felt the need to play the music of the band Suicide, which is Alan Vega plus Martin Rev, as well as some of Alan Vega's music independently and Martin Rev's independently, as well as some of the music they did under other monikers, because I felt this music was so prescient and so resonant with the way things feel for many of us in today's uh, difficult circumstances, or as the Reverend Kristen Kuriga mentioned this past Sunday, the age of overwhelm. And I think a lot of this music can help sustain us in this struggle. And sometimes when it's just music, as it often is with Suicide, Alan Vega, Martin Rev, that is vocalizing and otherwise sharing a sense of feeling overwhelmed and outraged at the same time, that makes us feel like we're together with other people, and we're paradoxically enough energized to resist. So that was a long answer, but there is a lot of this music out there.
I have a question. It's more
Sure.
personal, but when you discovered this band, and how I don't know how you did discover the band, because you were probably just listening to a lot of bands, but did you have, I just want to see what it made you feel like. Did you feel like, this is kind of my mirror?
Yeah,
Or,
yeah.
and then also, were you able to share it with your friends, where you had some of your friends that you had at the time, were they groupies as well? I mean, because this is very obviously very transformative for you as a
Yeah.
young person, and I just wanted to hear your process there.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for that question. Yeah. Well, as I mentioned right at the beginning of this talk, when I first came across this music, I identified with music of punk, but then I heard Joy Division, and I felt like this did so much more for me. I liked punk and continue to like it. I At the time when I went to begin my undergraduate studies at Wesleyan, I took it as a compliment when people right away told me that, "Oh, you look a lot like Johnny Rotten." So much so that I decided, well, why don't I go with that and try to make myself look even more like Johnny Rotten, who was the frontman for the Sex Pistols at the time. But I was very interested in music, and got involved right away with our college radio station and got a radio show and started doing other work there. And a lot of my friends that were interested in lots of different kinds of music, and so I did share this kind of interest, and there were others who were interested in it as well. There were people who were interested in very different kinds of things too. But I think it was a really good environment where people were sharing lots of different kinds of music. I think it was earlier um, in the early 1970s that I felt like I just was having a hard time with music that was especially popular among many of my peers because a lot of it was music like from Boston or Kansas or Yes or Emerson, Lake and Palmer and I don't know. The only one I really liked among those that were really popular was Led Zeppelin. Oh yeah, Jethro Tull was a big favorite. Styx, uh, Rush. It was when I discovered punk that I actually found, oh, this is great music that I think I really can identify with. I did like the music of the Kinks and the Who that preceded uh, punk, and that made me somewhat acceptable to people. But I can remember, I just wonder what they think now. People back then who would come to me and say, there's this really cool song by Kansas. It's called Dust in the Wind. The lyrics are just so profound. And I said that they don't seem that profound to me. Or I remember Rush. They wrote this great song called Xanadu. And I said, yeah, that's from Samuel Taylor Coleridge. But anyway, it just, uh, and they just told me nobody satisfies you. Uh, but yeah, so it took me a little while to find my music, but once I did, I was part of groups of people who shared it, and I think that helped a lot. When I was at Wesleyan, I became the music director at our radio station, and I loved that job, and we went to lots of live gigs. We sponsored a lot of them. I got to meet lots of different groups, even interview them. So that was fun. And we played the interviews on the radio station, and some of them are probably still out there somewhere. They're a little embarrassing. I can remember the Go-Go's on their first tour. I had an interview with them, and all four of them, or four, I think it was four. Yeah, they were all flirting with me throughout the interview, and I was trying to be straight on the interview, asking these questions while they just kept interrupting in these flirtatious ways. So it actually made a really good interview, but it wasn't what I had in mind in approaching it. So I had a really good experience with music, and I guess I could say also that both my parents they were very into music of a variety of different kinds, and my mother was somebody who listened to my listened to my radio show at Wesleyan. And then during the summer, when they needed extra people to volunteer to do shows, because not all the students were there anymore, she volunteered to do classics for lunch. So she was a classic music DJ for a good number of years during the summer. Uh, and yeah, so it was, I guess hopefully that helps a little bit, explain some of where I came from.
Did you play any instruments as a child, or did you play
Oh,
piano
great.
and all that
Uh,
stuff?
yeah, that's a good question too. And yeah, when I was very young, before very early, I played piano, but I was so young that I didn't like it and the demands upon me, and I made the mistake of saying, "That's enough. I don't want to do it anymore." I must have been about 6 or 7. I've been doing it for about 3 years, and they said, all right, you don't have to do it." And subsequently, I wish that hadn't been the case. But my mother was insistent because she had played the French horn in high school and had a French horn that I was going to play the French horn. And I didn't want to play the French horn, but I had to. And I never ever liked playing the French horn. I had to do it. I wished I could play the trumpet or the drums, but no, I was forced to carry the French horn back and forth to school from elementary, middle, and high school, often every
Wow.
day. Yeah. Even when I wasn't playing it. And just to show what my mother was like, when I went off to Wesleyan, and I hadn't played the French horn in the longest time, and I was never very good and never very interested in it. But my mother said, I insist that you try out on the French horn for like, please, 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 you have to do it. You have to do it. And if you don't, it doesn't work out, then that's enough. And I like, okay. So I went, and I knew this was going to be terrible. and I couldn't get any sound because they hadn't played the French horn the longest time. And they were very nice to say, "Well, you could come back after practicing, and we'll give you another chance." But I just felt like, good, the French horn is done forever.
That's
But then,
amazing.
yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah. So I,
Thank
I
you for
took up
sharing that.
I took up drums in college. I didn't have a drum set, but I just pieced together a variety of different kinds of things that I could hit. And somebody gave me a snare drum. So I had that as well. And we formed what we called a punk band because we thought that sounds good because that way we can just make a lot of noise and we could say it was intentional and we don't even have to be that good. And we called it the Green Angst Group, GAG. And yes, I'm trying to think, what was my, yeah. Anyway, I had some strange moniker that fit with being a punk musician, that fit with one of those G, A's and G's. It was three of us. So I did that. But yeah, it was partly because I was forced to play the French horn and I didn't want to. Uh,
Thank you. And it's so amazing that you played the French horn that long. You
yeah.
know, that's amazing. And you
Well,
still,
that has a lot to do with my mother.
yeah, I mean, yeah, you're doing this still in high school, which is pretty
My,
amazing.
I don't know how many other people have experience with parents like that, but my parents were very insistent that you try everything, you keep trying and try it and try it and try it. Even if you don't like it, you're not doing well at it. You've got to really prove it to them that you've given it the best possible shot.
Wow.
And yes,
Oh,
this is a church thing too. I went through my Roman Catholic experience until I was confirmed. They insisted, though both of my parents had stopped going to Roman Catholic Church, that I must go through this all the way through confirmation. Then I could decide if I want to or not. But my feeling about confirmation was just that that's it. I no longer have to go to church. And then I felt it was so ironic. They just said, now you're a soldier of Christ. And all I was thinking, that's it. I no longer have to come back to this church. But I thought that was it. Then my mother said, "Oh, I insist that you try out the high school religion class." And I said, "Mom, you lied. You said that I don't have to do this anymore." And said, "No, you really should try it." And she just kept on and on. And so I went, and I knew I wouldn't like it. And we went around in a circle and yes, had everybody say who they were and something about themselves. Everyone was just bright and cheerful and peppy. And then we're all supposed to repeat what everyone else said before that. And when it came to me, I said, "My name is Bob, and I don't like anything." And then everyone else in the group went around and just said, "And then there's Bob, who doesn't like anything." And then they just went, and I thought, oh, these people are even worse than I thought. Because they're just taking that up as if it's just part of the cheeriness of the group. And then the priest came and visited us and talked about how we should be wary of swimming pools because they're dangerous and they can lead to things that he just couldn't name, but I knew he meant sex. So and I thought, all right, I came home and told her I'm never, ever, ever going to do anything like that again. I went out of my way for you. That was a terrible, terrible evening. And if I had decided I didn't want to be part of a Roman Catholic Church before, I'm really clear now that I don't want to. Okay. But yeah, so a lot of this, yeah, has to
Oh,
do.
well, thank you for talking about that because that's pretty amazing that you had that much determination.
Yeah.
You just continued something that you didn't like, and wow,
Or
very
maybe I just bowed down to my parents. I don't know. Yeah.
no. You're living underneath their house, under their
oh.
roof, so you know.
Yeah, yeah. So, but my book, it has enough of those kind of things too. I was a little worried about it, but I thought my mother is 90 and she's not going to read my book, so I don't have to worry about the things that she might not like that I
Good
include in
for
it.
good for you. Thank you so much, Bob.
You're welcome.
And I think that is my cue to say also thank you very much, Bob.
Oh, yep. Thank you, Tony.
Always a pleasure to listen to people talk about things that they love. And I'm just thrilled to for all of you for being here. Um, the next, we don't really have another adult RE plan, but we are doing the common read. So the next thing, if you want to join us again to get together and discuss, will be on March 20th. We are doing the second session of the common read, which is Authentic Selves. Um, and if you've yet to pick up the book and don't know if you can, pick it up and get through parts of the book, it is still okay to come to those sessions, even if you have not really looked at any of the book. I think they're still worthwhile to come to and talk to us. And I think certainly standing up for trans rights and um, recognizing just the existence of trans people in this time is really super important. So thank you again, Bob, for this evening. Thank you all for being here, and I hope to all see
Yeah.
you again on the 20th, or if not, at some point around in the congregation on Sundays.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you all so much. Have a great
Bye, everyone.
Good night.